Egypt Games, Chapter 17.
Oracle speaks. The next day, by prearrangement, all the Egyptians met in the alley and entered the land of Egypt together. Toby said that was necessary so no one would have the chance to fool around with the oracle before everyone was there. Once inside the yard, everyone looked at Toby. Toby looked at April. Okay, Bassett, he said. You want to be the oracle priestess? So today it's your turn. You can do the ceremony of returning to the oracle for the answer. That is, unless you don't think you can think up a good answer. I can think of answers to anything, April said. But I thought you were expecting the oracle to do it on its own answers. Or did you change your mind? Oh no, Toby said. I didn't change my mind. I just thought you ought to have some good answers ready, just in case. So, let's get going. So April took charge. To get everyone in the mood, she got a box of costumes out of the shed and had everyone put something on, a headdress or a robe, or at least some jewelry. Then she set the scene. Okay, she said. Horeb, the famous general, has come on a pilgrimage to the grotto of Oracle of Thorth to ask a terribly important question. He arrived at the grotto for a few days and asked his question, and since then he has been fasting in a holy cell while he waits for the answers. You know, people who were going to the oracle had to prepare themselves very carefully, so they usually shut themselves up for a few days without any food and meditated until they felt very pure and sort of dizzy, and then they were ready to go. That's what you've been doing, Ken. Ken looked self-conscious, and Melanie made a funny, smothering sound. April was careful not to catch her eye. She knew that Melanie was trying not to laugh at the idea of a solid old Ken being pure and dizzy. April hurried on. The rest of us are priests in attendance of the oracle, and I am the high priestess, who's the only one who can go into the altar room where the oracle gives out the answers. Next, April had everyone help them make a twisted paper logs to burn in the sacred fire bowl, and then she lined them up all for a procession to the grotto. Ken was in the middle of the place of honor, and April demonstrated to him how he should walk with his hands crossed over his chest, his eyes sort of rolled up. April herself led the procession, and when they had gone twice around the yard, she lined everyone up on the edge of the temple. Then she approached the altar alone. First, she lit the candles and the incense and the sacred fire, and put the fire bowl on the floor in front of the altar. On the altar, Toth sat with his slip of paper on his beak, exactly as they had left him the night before. April bowed low before him and started in on an elaborate ceremony, using some of the old things they'd done before and some of the new ones that she had just thought up. She walked around the altar backwards 3 times, sprinkling the holy water. She pulled out 3 hairs from her head and dropped them in the fire. Then she sat down cross-legged between the fire and the altar and began to chant. Melanie sat down too on the edge of the temple floor and motioned for the others to do the same. Ai, ai, April chanted, making her voice go up and down on the scale. And all along the edge of the temple, the other Egyptians took it up. When the wailing chant was going strong, April suddenly cried, Stop! The mighty Thoth has heard us. The oracle has spoken. Very slowly and dramatically, with her eyes half closed and her face smothered in a dreamlike calmness, April raised her arms above her head and with both hands took the message from the beak of Thoth. Very, very slowly, she brought it down to the eye level and unfolded it. She read it carefully and then turned it over and read the other side. Her calmly regal high priestess expression faded, and she frowned as she read each side again. Then she stood up and stomped out of the temple. The rest of the Egyptians jumped up. Okay, said April. Who's the wise guy? Wise guy? What's the matter? What does it say? Everybody was talking at once. What did you write on the back of the paper yesterday? April asked Ken. What was your question? Ken shrugged. Oh, I don't know, he said. Just some dumb stuff about if I was going to get to be a star in the big league someday. April held out the slip of paper, and everybody crowded around to look. In Ken's large, neat handwriting, it said, Will I be a big league star someday? Yeah, that's it, Ken said. That's what I wrote. But then April turned the paper over so the other side was visible, and in very different handwriting, small and jittery, there was written, Man is his own star, and that soul who can be honest is only perfect man. How about that? April said. Did you write that too? Me? Ken said in amazement. No way, I didn't have time to write all that. Besides, I don't even know what it means. April and Melanie looked at each other and nodded. It was true. It didn't sound like anything Ken would do. They turned to Toby. Okay, Toby, April said. When did you write this? Toby looked disgusted. Let's not get ridiculous, he said. How could I have written all of that without anybody seeing me? Well, you must have, April said, because I know none of the rest of us did it. Oh, yeah, Toby said. I bet you did it yourself. From there on, the argument began to get louder and more personal. There were accusations and counter-accusations, but no one would admit to writing the mysterious and puzzling words that straggled across the back of Ken's question. It was finally Melanie who made peace by suggesting that maybe they should just try the whole thing again and see what happened instead of fighting about it. We can watch to see nobody writes the answer on the back. And then if we get another answer and we know none of us wrote it, her voice trailed off, and nobody offered to finish the sentence for her. It was the kind of thought that isn't easily finished. April, who won the straw drawing this time, and she thought quite a while before she decided on a question. After she'd written on a piece of notebook paper, she showed everyone the clean, clear back of the paper before she handed it, folded, to Toby for the ceremony of presenting the question to the oracle. Toby presided again as the high priest, and his ceremony was almost exactly the same as the day before. That is, the things Toby did were just about the same, but somehow the feeling was different. Or perhaps not so much different as more so, more spooky and supernatural. Even though all the Egyptians were positive that somebody was fooling and had somehow managed to write the answer to Ken's question, there are times when being positive isn't quite enough. There wasn't much light in the land of Egypt that afternoon, which didn't make it all less strange. The days had been getting shorter, of course, but it was something more than a gradual seasonal change. As Toby bowed and mumbled and chanted before the altar of Thoth, his high priestess face looking in the distance and unfamiliar in the deep shadows and flickering candlelight, low black clouds were moving in swiftly from the bay. In the temple, it was suddenly so dark that the reflected candles lit Thoth's glassy stare with its points of fire. Then, just as Toby was finishing his ceremony, there was a huge shuddering, thumping noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Elizabeth gave a little scream, and everyone rushed out of the temple. It wasn't until a rain-filled blast of air swept into the land of Egypt a moment later that the noise was recognized for what it was. Thunder! That was thunder! Everybody started saying to each other in voices that were giggly with relief. Somehow, without quite knowing how they'd gotten there, they were all six standing in a rather tight little group in the center of the storage yard. And rain, oh, wow, somebody added. That was the day that they found out that it really was impossible for more than one person at a time to get through the hole in the fence, no matter how hard they tried.